Parasite Eve is a franchise I've heard nothing but good things about in every aspect imaginable. An RPG title with horror elements running on PS1 hardware, with music that sounds otherworldly and intense, from the composer Yoko Shimomura, which I'm sure some of you know her from games like Kingdom Hearts, Super Mario RPG, and Renatus. Okay, maybe just me on that last one, but I promise you, dude, this game has some bangers, trust me. So it makes you wonder why I have never checked out the series. I mean, it hits a lot of the boxes I could want, but I've never been interested in finding a copy. Parasite Eve was Square's first M-rated RPG that used the Final Fantasy VII's engine, with it seemingly loved by fans at the time of its release. As a lot of the game journalists described the ATB combat to be interesting to play, while having an experimental feel. You journey as a girl named Aya Brea, as she travels around a rundown destroyed New York fighting monsters. She was designed by Tetsuya Nomura, with Sakaguchi stating his original vision he wanted for Aya was someone pretty close to the look Aerith gave off. But apparently when designing Aya, Tetsuya in the office overheard talks about how they wanted a short hair look for one of the characters, not knowing the two employees were going over details about another game entirely. He drew Aya with said short hair, and soon after he realized Sakaguchi really wanted her to have a ponytail and not the bob look he went with. But he said during the design showcase, Sakaguchi seemed pleased, so it stuck. When it came to Parasite Eve's development cycle, it lasted around 2 years, with Hironobu Sakaguchi creating the game's plot. He seemed quite passionate about it as well, even going on to state during this time he made sure to avoid certain media like movies, just so he wouldn't be influenced by something he saw. This all seemed to really pay off, as it went on to release with favorable opinions from buyers, and a sequel soon came after. Somehow fans still were craving another entry to release. Square Enix dabbled in bringing Aya back a few times, but it always seemed to get canned before it got out of the what if stage. But don't worry, cause fans only had to wait 10 years for that third game to finally come to light. Now originally, not much was known about the new addition to the franchise. With all that we had to work with was a picture of Aya. This didn't stop people on forums to start discussing what could be and showing their excitement. There were some talks about it being for mobile phones, however, with the devs stating that's what they were originally wanting, but soon settled on the Sony PSP. They decided to use the PSP since at the time it felt pretty cost effective to develop for and still allowed the team to have the freedom they wanted with pushing the game out. They said many times during development they were building Parasite Eve 3 as if it was a PS3 title, but making sure to compact it for the PSP's weaker power. But not everyone seemed on board with the PSP being the main priority, as Hajime Tabata went on to say before its release that they felt they should have prioritized the PS3 from the start, as he considered a lot during the dev process that they picked the wrong system. Which, damn, seeing someone being that critical on their work before release was interesting to say the least. Soon, fans started to get more info on what Parasite Eve 3 would become. This time around, instead of being a horror RPG like the past two games, we got a horror action third-person shooter with RPG elements. Something Square Enix has said many times that they don't have a lot of experience with creating, with their only real past endeavor being Dirge of Cerberus. So safe to say this was a really bad idea. Also, the name isn't even Parasite Eve 3, but instead called Third Birthday, which has to be the dumbest name I've ever heard of. But in story context, it does actually make sense, weirdly enough. Nomura, when asked in an interview why they went with the name change, he stated since it's been over 10 years from the release of Parasite Eve 2, they felt giving it a different name would help it stand out while not alienating new players from trying out the series, which basically translates to they wanted an excuse to reset everything so they could have a more fresh foundation. So by bringing a new name for this title, it would help the devs have more creative freedom with characters' personalities and motives, as they always could fall back on it being a different name. Which, from my bits of research, yeah, that didn't go over very well. Yeah, it's pretty safe to say no one likes the Third Birthday. Even when you do see any praise for the game, it's still always followed by the countless things it does wrong, and this review is no exception to that rule. Well, I think it's finally time to dip my toe into the unexplored waters of this horror series from Square, and why not do it with the worst game in this series? Is Third Birthday really the black sheep everyone claims? Will Dorito ever stop running up the food bill to quench his hunger? We will find out today as you all join me for my CQ Deep Dive Retrospective Review, Top 10 Nuzlocke Randomizer Funky Mode, featuring Dante from Devil May Cry. Third Birthday opens up with a beautiful shot of the city, New York, as everyone is in the Christmas spirit, till what appears to be a random blackout occurs. Everyone is confused and unsure what could be happening, just to then witness these strange roots come out of the ground as they start to destroy buildings, train cars, and even watching people die from it. This all comes together to form one of my favorite shots of a disaster occurring I've ever seen. Hearing the piano kick in after watching the people who were observing from the boats be swept away into the deep chilled water, to then gaze upon the Statue of Liberty consumed by the strange roots, with this panning shot starting to form around it, just to let the title fade into view. Holy shit, this gives me chills, man. We're now greeted with a few people standing around in some underground headquarters with Aya being shown to us. After all these years, she's finally here. As for the members, we have the soldier guy who acts like a soldier, the grumpy old scientist who's just grumpy, and the computer tech wizard who you can tell is smart because he will make it noted whenever possible he's good with technology.
Reprogramming codes, I can do. But you're the only one who can reprogram the past.
Before long, Aya gets strapped into this machine to then be forced out of her body as we cut to her possessing a soldier. This is all done thanks to Third Birthday's biggest gameplay mechanic being the overdrive device. This allows Aya and her team to go back into the past to change history. Yeah, that means we have time travel. For the most part, this isn't the worst way I've seen it done. In fact, there's some moments that actually are pretty clever with how it works around the idea of time traveling itself. But I don't think I would have went this route for a series that has been dormant for 10 years. The first mission for the most part just teaches us the basics, so not much to really cover story-wise. So let's talk about the gameplay. Throw out anything you know about third-person shooters because this plays nothing like those thanks to the fact that PSP has one analog stick. So with the majority of the weapons, Aya will auto-aim onto whatever she's fighting, with the ones that do require you to actually aim being a fucking nightmare to use on actual hardware. I thankfully was able to use a PS5 controller, so it was pretty easy to get the hang of everything, but God forbid doing this on an actual PSP. When it comes to guns, there's actually quite a few options to pick from. Aya will always have her trusty pistol with infinite ammo, but will come across assault rifles, snipers, shotguns, and grenade launchers. I really like how you can make some weapons go from complete trash to actually usable. You will be tasked with taking down the enemies of the game called Twisted. The designs on these guys are really cool, Reapers being some of my favorites just for the fact of how distorted and abstract they appear. For the most part, every Twisted you fight feels unique enough and all have pretty easy patterns to learn. But not all Twisted are fun to fight, with these air guys specifically always being more annoying than engaging. Mostly because of the game's biggest flaw, in my opinion. You see, if you want to try out Third Birthday, I recommend playing on easy. Not because this game is ghost and goblins hard. No, it's because every enemy is a goddamn bullet sponge. Even late game with fully powered weapons, I was doing almost no damage. I ended up just going with an assault rifle that had the worst handling possible because it prioritized power, since the majority of what I was fighting at the time was bigger than most Ford Raptor trucks. So aiming really doesn't matter when what I'm shooting is bigger than my love for Planet Daub. Sadly, if you want to do any damage in this game, most of those weapons will always have no ammo whatsoever. While you can find ammo drops, I had times where I was just completely out of any resources and had to rely on just my pistol, which meant mashing a button for 5 to 8 minutes till I won. This gets really bad for a specific boss fight later on. To spice up the game and not to just have it feel like any normal third-person shooter, you have the ability to take over anyone on the map and use them to fight. With some of the soldiers you can possess owning unique weapons. Majority of the time, the fourth weapon is worthless because it's not upgraded, but it's a cool way to test out different arsenals you haven't bought. As for the overdrive ability, I love and kinda dislike it at times. I'm personally leaning on more of the love side, however, but this has to do with the fact that it reminds me so much of Slitterhead's gameplay. where you can move to different people and have them fight alongside the two protagonists you picked for the mission. This was something when I originally planned to review Slitterhead I wanted to praise, since I never saw another game do this type of combat. And then I played Third Birthday and saw how the enemies at times can appear bug-like, just like Slitterhead's creatures, and then I realized how heavily Slitterhead was inspired by Third Birthday. Granted, the combat feel for both of these games are unique enough to not come off as a copy, but yeah, holy shit, they must have really been inspired by this PSP title. But hey, Slitterhead fans, don't worry, your game's still way better because you get to pull a Chinese 9/11 ending. Now, why do I not like the overdrive mechanic? Well, it's more in the lines of how it can ruin any tension in some fights when anytime I'm in danger, I can just swoop into another body with more backup pretty much spawning in unless I get super unlucky. Because of this, I don't ever really have to think of who I'm switching over to, since there's not really any reason to consider why or who I should dive towards. With the most thought that can occur comes from if they're on a higher platform or not. With the majority of the time if they are, they will easily get flanked and die. If I ever was trying to get a specific person, it was mostly because they have a required weapon I need for the fight. And if this ever happens, just letting it known now, these fights are the fucking worst to do in the whole game. There's one encounter I'm going to talk about real quick. It's a very late game one to be exact, with a Reaper. You're taught this specific one is so powerful you can't damage it by normal means. However, a guy with a plasma cannon will spawn in at random. He's the only one who can deal damage for the first phase. If he at any point dies, you then have to sit there and wait for another random soldier to spawn in with said cannon. And sometimes the backup who appears will just not have the needed weapon. This means I now have to let the backup die just so I can get more and hope to God they have the weapon I need. Now you can argue if you make sure the person doesn't die, then it's not an issue. But the issue here is that anytime you shoot said enemy with whoever you dived into, you are now targeted. These soldiers are also real humans, so they die in a matter of seconds, specifically with this Reaper fight. It doesn't just have a roll attack, he can teleport, trap you in a ring that you can't escape from for a good minute, or shoot projectiles at you. The best way to handle bosses in Third Birthday is to have one guy shoot at it a few times, wait for it to slightly start turning to face where it was getting shot at, then dive into another guy with the specific weapon you need, which then you start shooting for a split second and repeat. But even then, there's moments where the boss or enemy will just know you dived into that one guy and instantly make a beeline towards you. I had a moment in this fight where I was waiting more than I was actually engaging in the combat because the game just wouldn't give me who I needed to even deal damage. Comparing it back to Slitterhead, I felt like there was a bit more thought of who I want to switch to even if the common people share the same weapon attack. Because they didn't have projectiles to shoot off with the only area effect move being an explosion they can attach to their body, picking a certain human close to the monster was beneficial to dealing damage. But in Third Birthday, since all my options are soldiers, the most thinking you will do is who is the furthest away from said threat, because God forbid they're even an inch near it. Don't get me wrong, I still like the idea of diving into people and moving across the map as it allows you to be aggressive with everyone at your disposal, while also giving you the options to move your soldiers around to help create more situations where you can flank better. The problem is, Third Birthday seems to want to do everything to work against a fun battle system attached with this mechanic, as any real thought or out-of-the-box use with said overdrive system will usually just cause your soldiers to die, while the cheap and boring tactics are ideal to do because the AI just isn't smart enough to fight against it. Only 3 fights in the whole story, with 2 of them just being repeated bosses, did I ever actually have to think of where I was going to dive at. Sadly, the third one in that list is the final boss, but at least it has 3. Finally, we have IS Super Form, Liberation Mode. It's actually kind of shit. Now in early game, I think it's super good because everything you have at that point is so pitiful damage-wise. Any boost at that point is a godsend. But this form barely lasts, and whenever you do use it, you just shoot harder and can teleport while moving, and that's pretty much it. And then when you get to some later fights, however, it can't even do that right, so I mostly save this for certain enemies I would come across so I could deal with them quicker. But really, dude, this mode is just so bad. Honestly, if they just made it last like 5 seconds longer, it probably would be a bit more useful, but instead it feels like premature ejaculation. While at the start, it's quite amazing to trigger, but then I'm left with the disappointment of barely getting to do anything during the burst of epicness I had filling the screen. I still want to mention, when Third Birthday has good combat encounters and you really are getting into the flow of it, This is downright amazing to play. I really want another company to tackle a battle system like this that isn't Slitterhead, because there's so much potential in this that both games just seem to fumble ever achieving in their own ways. After the mission is over, they force Aya to teleport back to the base to make sure she doesn't die from this huge twisted that appeared. We then cut to her seeming to be dreaming, with the sequence showing us someone reaching for a gun, and then a demonic child appears in the POV shot. It seems to jump scare her awake, and she talks about how this dream has been reoccurring for a bit, but unsure what it all means. This is when the man from before comes to tell Aya she can finally have her own room and not be locked in a jail cell, since her observation is no longer needed. But Aya declines to move to a new room, as she would rather stay here. The grumpy man tries to reassure her that being hard on herself isn't going to change anything, and even if she can't remember her past, it doesn't mean she can't have a future. And those words kind of hit way deeper than needed. We can now finally explore the hub area where the base of operations happens. You think for a home base it would have a chill vibe to it, but the music is quite ominous and empty, turning this home away from home to what feels more in line as a prison. But thank God we have a shower room and a gun shop we can visit, with the music actually being that chilled vibe a hub area should become acquainted with. While exploring these parts, I was actually surprised how much flavor text they gave Aya. She can interact with any object, and there's probably around 2 to 4 lines of different text she will say regarding what the player examines. This alone really helps me feel more acquainted with the world, and getting to see Aya's perspective on a no smoking sign, while meaningless in the grand scheme of things, it's meaningful enough to help the player feel as if they're in a way there with Aya herself. Now, since this is made by Square Enix and Square is known for its RPGs, we have to have some RPG mechanics. This features a gun level system and an upgrade tree. You can level up your guns by using them in battle, kind of like in FF7. This helps the player experiment with different options at your disposal, or if you're like me, you stuck with the same types for the majority of your journey, as most things like the shotgun are useless since you want to avoid being up close to enemies at all cost. The damage on them is also quite pitiful, man. I don't even understand why this is even a thing. As for Aya's upgradable features, this is done with what's known as the DNA board. While not overtly complex, it's a system I found myself really liking. It got me wanting to see what would manifest if I combined certain nodes together to create stronger forms or new buffs entirely. There's a good amount of thought and finesse that can be done if the player wants to experiment with what's to offer, but you can just do the bare minimum if you really wanted, as these buffs will only really activate at random after an overdrive is performed, but you can get more DNA nodes every time you achieve a successful overdrive attack. Now, I wanted to save this move for this specific part since I felt it fit better, but during combat after a certain amount of damage is given to an enemy, a yellow triangle can appear over Twisteds. If you press the triangle while locked onto them, Aya will dive into their brain and deal a buttload of damage. This is usually something you want to fish for to help with encounters, but also so you can pick up more DNA nodes. Overall, like I said, this game has some cool mechanics that flow really well together, if only these weren't trapped in the third birthday. Starting our next mission, we dive into a concert that soon gets interrupted by Twisted as we watch the people attending get shredded into paste inside these portals, causing everyone to go into mass panic. Hell, even Aya is over here crying, which now lets me bring up the term, she got other-emmed. This is what I like to use when you have a pre-established character who goes from stoic and fearless to a scaredy whiny persona. While it's safe to say I would also be scared in the same situation Aya is in right now, this is the same girl who has fought countless things similar to the Twisted before many times. This fear that she shows a lot when we venture on also causes a weird ludonarrative dissonance, as we will be burning through Twisted left and right and killing anything that stands in our way, just for cutscene Aya to start cowering in fear, barely able to fire at the Twisted in front of her. But it goes back to why people hated this version of Aya, which rubs more salt in the wounds as the devs wanted to reimagine her for this new entry, and their choice was to make her a crybaby bitch. Well, for the first chapter, we're starting off with the first Twisted boss. Third Birthday really pulls no punches, I see. This is where the game really emphasizes how you should use the cover system to protect yourself from oncoming attacks. The problem is, trying to initiate covering is very jank, and more often than not, your barricade gets destroyed from a single attack before it can even keep you safe. Plus, the AI love to push you out of cover because they decided they want to cover there as well. So because of that, I would only use cover if it was better than dodge rolling everywhere. Now, this boss really isn't that hard, since it's very easy to just wait out his attacks and continue diving into whatever reinforcements comes, but to say this is a fun fight, yeah, no, the bosses, and I mean basically every boss besides the final one, all just feel like bullet sponges. So unless you really love just holding down the shoot button and running around for 4 minutes, then boy, is this game for you. Design-wise, this guy is freaking cool. Having him appear to be this big twisted hand mouth and only able to see some of its body through the portal he appeared from, giving the mystery that there's probably more to him beyond the portal that the player can't see. Third Birthday does a wonderful job at making what you're fighting appear to be threats, but again, the battle itself, not really that fun. Maybe if my weapons didn't do chip damage the whole time, I could feel more entitled to actually engage with the dive system beyond just running away. But before long, the twisted retreats and we can now progress. But since we're finally in a real stage, I can talk about the graphics and atmosphere. Man, for this being a PSP game, this really does come off as an early PS3 title visually. This club area I feel is one of my favorite places to explore, like god damn the lighting and the reflective floors. It really helps give off that dimly lit club vibe that everyone seems to love. Even after stopping the giant twisted, you're greeted to the club room floor being covered in a very dark red from the massive amount of blood from the people who perished. Seeing it reflecting the ambient light around it, it's a very dark and unnerving scene, but somehow really charming to look at. Even if I'm playing this on an emulator for footage, on a PSP it looks just as amazing. And while each level layout can be described as linear hallways filled with monsters, I don't think that should really be as big of a negative as people would make it out to be if those hallways are fun to engage and traverse around in. Which I never really had an issue with Third Birthday's level design because they are all visually interesting and feel pretty realistic to how New York would be laid out. And when the game decides to get trippy, it nails those looks down to a T. I had to remind myself at times I was playing a handheld game, not an early launch title for the PS3. There's so many areas you will come across that make you just want to stop and take in your surroundings before heading out to fight more of the monstrosities that lie in wait for you. So if there's one thing that Third Birthday does really well, it is the visuals for sure. But that uniqueness doesn't just stop at the visuals, because when reaching our first safe area, I was quite surprised about some of the dialogue you can read from the soldiers for this mission. With this moment in particular where they're all questioning if they will make it out alive, as one of the guys mentioned how he promised some girl he would build a house for them to live in. When asked if that girl was his wife, we learn it's actually his pet dog, with him replying back saying how it shouldn't matter who or what is waiting for you back at home. As long as you have a reason to make it back, that should be all that matters. Like, these are NPCs designed to die for you. You're not really meant to care if the guy you just used gets brutally murdered with his skin burning off, but Square Enix was here giving them all names, easily missable conversations on how they're dealing with the trauma of the war they're in. Then you get to watch them get trapped and consumed by the Twisted while you, the player, will be subtly reminded that you're playing as these guys. Whenever Aya takes over one of them, your name at the bottom isn't hers, it's the guy you possess. It's kinda heart-wrenching because these deaths are caused by you majority of the time because the player didn't manage their host well enough. All of this technically never gets addressed and no one will ever condone Aya for being a monster by letting these countless men die for her, but you, the player, will know. It's actually crazy how much better this game makes you feel for NPCs than The Last of Us 2 did, and that one was supposed to be the big selling point for why you would want to play it. Aya soon walks into an empty hallway, and we notice this girl form into existence as she appears behind her. Obviously startled, she points a gun at her but catches her composure as she assumes she's a survivor. Flashbacks of her dream then starts to shoot through her head, but before long a huge tremor occurs as we can see the ghost girl is getting away. As we try to chase after her, we end up running into our first encounter with a Twisted we can't damage called the Reaper. It's the same one I talked about before, but I really dislike the first time you find one of them since you're tasked with using your dive powers to escape. That's not the issue, however. The problem is at times when a new soldier wants to show up so you can continue the chase, seems to be at random. And this Reaper without fail will trap you, so your only option is to run around like an idiot in the small area he created and hope he's not feeling aggressive today. Then your screen the whole time during the chase has this stupid black flashing filter that's supposed to alert the player the Reaper can see you. Yeah, no shit. We're in a fucking hallway. Where else would I be? How would he not see me? But when you encounter him the second time on this stage, you have a way bigger area to work with, and this is where the dive mechanic really shines, since you're able to go across the room avoiding his chase, and making the Reaper lose track of you while searching for the exit door. It's a very clever use of the mechanics and made this encounter quite engaging while feeling intense. Even though you're still helpless at dealing with the Reaper, You actually can take advantage of the one thing Aya has over anyone else, which is her powers. We do the shoot some more and destroy a bunch of Twisted in our way just to run back into the boss from before. However, this time around he's fully out of the portal and he's huge. To take him out, we have to deal enough damage to his body parts to drop him to the ground. Doing so exposes his weak points and makes it where we can actually deal real damage to him. Overall, the same issue with the bosses I mentioned before applies here as well: bullet sponge and boring tactics. But I can't say I wasn't enjoying the power fantasy of going toe-to-toe with this giant beast and watching him fall. Upon his defeat, we finally come across the child from before, as the code guide tells us her name is Emily Jefferson. Emily then starts to walk towards us as she spouts cryptic info about the girl Aya keeps seeing in her dreams, as she tells her she needs to remember while calling us sister. Her face distorts into a Twisted just to appear normal again as she keeps telling Aya to remember time 0. But then she begins to float in the air, screaming as her body forms into a gigantic blob, a Twisted that can't be damaged by our shots. We build our liberation meter just enough to finally deal damage to this creature, allowing us for a brain jack attack. Now repeat mashing the shoot button for 5 minutes while this girl begs us to remember, and that's basically the fight. We deliver the last brain jack attack, and inside the mind of the creature, Aya is able to absorb the girl into her, finally defeating the Twisted and giving us a flashback of her pointing a gun at a child who looks a lot like her. But before we can find anything else out, we're back in our cell as we awake. The old man hurries over to us as he mentions Cray was killed a couple days earlier, so we need to go back in time to stop his death. This is when this other guy appears behind our old friend, and his name is Owen. And the first thing Owen does is point a gun at us, which I'm sure the beef I'm seeing here has to do with something from the past games, but that ends quicker than it started as both men go off to chat. Aya, upon almost getting shot, decides it might be time to leave her goon dungeon to continue the next mission. They want her to infiltrate the Babel to learn more about how to destroy the big orb, and save Cray since we learn he has been killed in action, with the new girl named Gabriella taking his place for now. We see her already flirting with Aya, and sadly, this is probably the most untropy behavior anyone has shown this whole time. Going from that scene to then a direct shot of our character's ass was a bit jarring, but I think I can finally bring up the damage system. Well, the way Square Enix decided to show if you were taking damage was based upon how much of Aya's clothes are ripped off, as the more times you're sliced, shot, and eaten alive, the better chance of seeing her flat ass. Aya, sorry buddy, but this is no longer the meta, come on bro, pack it up. Now, this is just really jarring to me. You have what appears to be a serious story, and Aya never acts sexy or even shows any sex appeal, since the majority of the time she's crying. It makes watching her outfit get ripped to shreds awkward at best and tone deaf at worst. I know I'll sound like an SJW because I don't want to see an attractive girl's ass on my screen, but when it doesn't add anything and ruins the vibe they're trying to set, I think it's worth saying, hey, I don't think this fits. Now, I feel they did do this because technically Aya is supposed to be seen as fragile and sexy, as even Nomura stated this in an interview. But even if that is the case and she's supposed to be a sex appeal icon, I don't really feel this fits all that much, and it really takes me out of this serious story that they're trying to set up. All I can think of is the team just seeing her ass out and not one person goes, maybe you should get dressed, Aya, what are you doing? I really think this could have been executed better if they really wanted her to somehow have her ass on screen, but God forbid the Gooners hear you not wanting a half-naked girl on the screen at all times. But switch this with a guy walking around with his raging cock out and watch as they want him covered. However, that's a whole other argument for a Stellar Blade video if I ever do tackle it. Heading back into the past, we're now on the streets of New York as we're tasked to go find Cray. This is when you can really see the numbers these roots have done on the city, as no one but you and the other soldiers are still alive. But it doesn't take long till we run into a new Twisted called Rovers. As for their design, I really fuck with it, and watching them spin around in the air is pretty neat. As things start to heat up and it ends up stunning us all with electricity, Gabriella comes from a helicopter and saves us from being Twisted food. This is now when we get our first look at the sniper, and it's a sniper alright. This is more just a tutorial for the part after where you have to fight these bees called stinkers that drop toxic gas below, with the sniper being the only real reliable way to take them out. Now, I didn't really use the sniper all that much, but it did come in handy for very specific moments. So I would at least say if you really want it on your arsenal, you won't go wrong, because it's also not the shotgun. We're now outside where the Babel is hiding, and it's up to us to fight a bunch of enemies and take out the 3 red orbs. And let me just say right now that this moment here is incredibly insane that this is running on a PSP. Aya comes face to face with the grotesque creature as bodies fly all around her in this liminal void. The music that plays here with the moment makes the Babel feel like an actual threat. You feel truly powerless as you look onto what appears to be at this point a god. Watching this thing fly around while you're stuck in place, having the only way of escaping its clutches being the ability to dive into the countless bodies trapped inside. Even though you're able to shoot at it, you can't even tell what part you're aiming at, showing just how much the Babel defies anything humans understand. Again, I can't stress this enough how amazing this moment is and just how impressed I am to see an area filled with all this trippy detail work on a PSP. This is the other boss I talked about where diving around takes some thought, as he will randomly pull a move that tries to suck you down below, and your only means of escaping is to climb up by diving. You need to also actually plan to be behind him to avoid moves that can instant kill you. Just shows under the right circumstances, the combat can be more thought-provoking. But because this is the third birthday where chip damage is king, this fight is fucking dreadful. After around 8 minutes of repeatedly pressing my fire button, I just wanted this to end. Unlike in other maps, you have a chance of finding ammo pickups. Here, since you can't move, there's no option to really restock, so once you're out, you're basically out. Your best bet is to randomly find a body that has a fourth weapon, but as I said before, since these are never upgraded, your pistol will usually still do more damage at this point. Truly, what a letdown, as everything from the atmosphere and build-up is perfect beyond belief, but then actually playing it, it's not so much fun. Funny enough, you will encounter one of these guys later on, and I was able to clear it way faster, and what do you know? The encounter was enjoyable because I didn't spend 10 minutes of my life turning my brain off and pressing shoot. It really just upsets me because when third birthday reaches those highs, I'm in awe. But then it shoots itself in the foot and I'm reminded again that I'm playing the worst game in the trilogy. Upon brainjacking it, the gigantic tower starts to collapse as Aya finally took down the first Babel. This is when she sees Cray as he's badly injured, meaning we were too late. Cray gives her a motivational speech about death and whatnot as he reminds her she'll be able to find him waiting for her right here when she dives again. But when Aya calls to let them know she found Cray, the detective Owen from before answers and tells us we lost contact with Mogsigny's signal. Owen then offers that he can guide Aya to the location to save Mogsigny. Obviously this won't be a trap, so we have nothing to worry about. Wow, who would have guessed this was a trap? Yeah, it turns out Owen gassed everyone, making them pass out, as Aya can't find Gabriella. Well, apparently this was all a setup to take her out and end the Overdrive project. We are then attacked by a gigantic Twisted that forms into a bee-like creature. Now, this boss can go burn. I hate this goddamn boss. Design-wise, top tier like everything else in the game, but actually fighting it is near impossible. For one, you again do no damage unless you go into the armored truck. But if you use the truck, then it gets attacked right away, and if it ever dies, you're basically screwed with doing damage. Which, trust me, even if it's an armored truck, it will die quite fast. If you ever have to restart the battle, a very likely outcome that will play out each respawn is you get shot right away. This means either the truck will take damage or you lose one soldier without warning. You're also forced to use a sniper since the gigantic Twisted will morph into small stinkers and then fly out of reach to hit the one that flashes red. But more often than not, you will die before getting the shot off because of the way the AI targets you over the non-controlled NPCs. This boss is also able to stun lock you to death with a single attack where it shoots a bunch of bullets at you. Even the cover system most of the time won't last against this attack, making the best case for survival being to circle around light posts and hope it never reaches you. Truly, this fight is the fucking worst, and I even had my recording fail so I don't have footage of me actually beating it, so while not the game's fault, I hate it even more because of the outside factor. Now, I usually have a high patience for games and annoying moments, but man, was this starting to test it. You get a cutscene when you brainjack it as a voice can be heard calling out to you. So just like that one fight, we are now getting bombarded with attacks and some girl telling Aya to remember. After beating the worst boss in the game, we end up running into Eve as a strange man tries to take her. He asks us if we can remember anything or who he is, but this just seems to piss her off, so Aya points a gun at him demanding Eve to come to her. But out of nowhere, Eve just disappears. As Aya's brain dive is ending, she demands to know this man's name. As he tells us, it's Kyle. Waking back in our jail cell like we always do, it seems like the same thing from before about us being told we can go to our new room starts to happen. But this time around, Aya wants to know if the man can look into Kyle and Eve for us. When he questions who those are, she explains it's her younger sister. Cutting back to the main area, we get Cray again complaining about sending a rookie to save his men, as they explain how the queen has since awakened inside the new Babel, meaning it's up to Aya again to take out another incomprehensive creature. Inside Grand Central Station, everything has a blue hue to it from the windows casting light down below, but before I can admire it, we get attacked by a Reaper that can't be killed, so you can already tell this mission will go well. After escaping, we get radio chatter among the soldiers about a girl walking around, as one even states her face was all twisted. We try to contact Captain Russo about his whereabouts to help us locate the girl they mentioned. When we finally get a hold of him, he tells us where he's at, so it now means we're going to be on top of a bunch of subway trains. As we make our way through these dingy underground tunnels, it's really such an achievement that the devs made a level about walking on broken down trains enjoyable enough to actually want to be here. Even if I think the enemy placement goes a bit overboard as you're fighting these giant heavy hitters on small as fuck platforms with no real way around them or paths that are covered. But besides the cheap enemy placement, I kinda really like this stage a lot. But once outside the Babel, we get the space cannon from before and make quick work of the Twisted that surround the area, creating their last stand. This is when we have a cutscene play out where we finally see Eve again. Everyone is confused as there's no data on Eve, but not because it's just not findable, it's because Eve isn't supposed to exist. As they mention, what we're seeing is the possibility of Eve existing, just for Cray to come out of nowhere and try to shoot us for getting near the girl he claims is his daughter, calling her Isabella. This is when he tells us that he killed everyone to protect her, and we watch him form into Eve as we brain dive inside. We're now transported to this map of a blood ocean as far as the eye can see, as giant red spears form and morph in the air. It seems Cray was also teleported here, and he tells us that no matter what, we must try to save our sister and never give up. As we watch Cray fade to dust, with his final words being that he knew he would see Isabella once again. The coding guy rushes to Cray after realizing what's going on to save him, but before he can, we watch him fade away, leaving the guy all by himself, as he soon forgets why he even ran out here in the first place, meaning that Cray no longer exists in our universe. We cut back outside with Aya and Eve as Kyle shows up. She begs him to save Eve at all costs before being pulled back to present time, as Kyle reminds her he will do everything he can to save their little princess. This then ends our mission for the chapter, as we now learn the guy from before is more than likely Eve's father, making Aya her sister slash mom, I think? Our last effort is now underway to take out the last Babel, with it being at the Pentagon, with everyone having 2 hours to stop it before the government sends a nuke to New York. However, something is off. Aya isn't in her jail cell this time around. In fact, she's with a scientist who really can't stop wanting to goon every time Aya even speaks. His name is Kunihiko, and he's going to help Aya finally end the threat, with the main goal being to recover Eve after all this is over. But when Aya tries to overdrive, nothing happens, as she tells him she can't go back to the past anymore since the device was destroyed. We now get shots of everyone dead with the device in flames. Unsure what occurred, we're soon told the CCTV footage from the lab showed Kyle was behind the deaths of everyone, meaning we gotta go locate Aya's ex-fiance and stop the Babel as well. This now precedes some of the hardest and annoying fights ever in the game. Even with armored trucks, these fights are quite annoying since most Twisted can only be hurt at certain times or again are bullet sponges. Now I really do like the small helicopter section that appears later in the level, as anytime I use something that flies, I always think of Star Fox. The music that accompanies this part is also quite the bop. Having the helicopter circle around the building, bringing back up to the soldiers inside, it's a good showcase of just how huge this root structure is and a way to feel more engaged with the parties of people working to take out the Babel. This is when we're told we can find Kyle at the top of the tower, so we now have to work our way up there fighting bosses and more Twisted, till we come face to face with the man himself. Aya this time finally has the balls to pull the trigger and blast a bunch of shots into his chest. This, however, makes him turn into a gigantic monster. Now, I really like in this fight we have access to our guns on the ground and choppers in the sky, making this all feel like a group effort, even if picking the chopper for the whole fight is the more reliable plan. After we get him down to low health, we can now brainjack inside of him, and we end up back at that blood ocean area from before, as we can tell Eve is here. When a big burst of light fills our screen, this is when a flashback is shown of everyone getting shot at Aya's wedding, just for us to see her point a gun at Eve and kill her. Meaning, Aya is the one who actually killed her own sister. She approaches Kyle and they finally have their heart-to-heart again, as he knows his life is finally coming to an end. The scientist calls on the radio to warn Aya that something is going on with the Babel, but each cry gets ignored as Kyle continues to raise her up. As he tells her eternity is inside her, and he proceeds to die. As the earth rumbles below them, the Babel starts to merge, as it single-handedly stops the force of a nuke by wrapping around the blast. The blackness from the roots fade as what appears to be glowing crystals form all over it. But after the blast is gone, we notice someone down below quite familiar, as it's none other than the science guy, leaving us to wonder what his original plan was all along. Well, turns out the Babel we've been fighting is an overdrive system like the one Aya uses. Not only that, we learn about a new species of life called the High Ones, with the ability to take over humans, as the Chief is one of those high intellect species. So, let's go hunt him down. Seeing the white floors and walls clashing with the red here is such an artistic touch that I enjoy dearly. Even if I hate a lot of the enemies they throw at you here, I can't deny just how perfect this area feels for a final mission. Like I said, the artists were outright talented with how they made a PSP game to shine like it was a home console version. Room after room of fighting some of the hardest mob fights to finally run into that Reaper I mentioned at the start that can only be damaged by a specific weapon. Now, I already talked about my issues with this guy before, but I'll sum it up real quick. Yeah, fuck this guy. After what felt like forever, we finally reached the Babel core as we run into Hyde. He starts to mention how he's tasked with destroying the Twisted as their beings from the future, but every time somehow he fails and the cycle ends up repeating back at time 0, which is where it all started, being the church. Aya demands Hyde to tell us why he wanted us to fight the High One. He lets her know it's because what he desires is beyond the door, mentioning the war we've been dealing with against the Twisted and how whenever one of them dies, that energy goes to powering up the armies of Twisted, making the Babel stronger. Each High One we kill meant the Babel grew and grew, giving Hyde the ability to unlock the door to time 0, even if that meant sacrificing everyone they care about in the process. Hyde then proceeds to morph into a disgusting creature, as we now need to end him. This fight, weirdly enough, is fucking great. It's not only challenging, but very atmospheric. Just watching this man slither around like a snake and laughing like an idiot as he's trying to kill Aya makes you realize the devs weren't messing around anymore and wanted this game to go out with a bang. Performing another brainjack attacks grants us a flashback of our wedding as more is uncovered about what really happened, as we watch Eve get shot by Aya, proving without a doubt she did shoot Eve. Hyde explains it was done to stop the mother from awakening, with him taunting Aya for wanting to change what happened, as he finally adds not only can she overdrive, but so can others, with him saying out loud, it's finally time to go to Eve. This is when we have to fight another Babel, and taking it out we come across Hyde again for the final battle. It's time to put an end to this once and for all. Aya tells Hyde that no matter what, she will save Eve, even if it means destroying him. While this fight is pretty much the same as last time, I enjoy the moment where the game pulls a my friends are my power and limits your brain dive host to the 4 people you've been with through the game, making it where you really do have to plan when brain diving is worth it, as he can also brain dive into the people around the field, making it hard to track him at times. Again, this fight is really fucking cool and well made, and I think does a good job at testing if you really did master all of your abilities. I just wish the rest of the game was more in line with this. Hyde, as he reaches defeat, gives it one more time to stop Aya as he himself transforms into his gigantic alien form. We now get to see the true strength Liberation Mode has to offer, as time is no longer a factor. Yeah, I then rolled around and shot the whole time, making me invincible and ruining all tension. You cannot die if you constantly roll. It's so stupid. Yeah, sucks it went from an actual well-designed tussle to mash, shoot, and turn brain off, but what do you expect for the 3rd birthday? Hyde is destroyed as now Aya can go to time 0 and change what she did. So now we can finally learn what really happened during the wedding day. We then witness the military raid inside and shoot everybody in attendance, even Aya herself. But soon we see both Aya and Eve start to glow blue, to then have it cut back to the soldiers all getting shot by her, with her now crying as Hyde appears and calls to her to return back to her original vessel. He slowly walks up to Eve's body, asking her to form into him. She tells Hyde she was just trying to save Aya's soul, but ended up destroying it in the process, making Eve responsible for the events that occurred here, as the parts that remained of Aya's soul are actually what we've been fighting this whole time, the Twisted, while the High Ones were formed from Eve's own body deteriorating. Because of them, they were how 2 new species were created. Hyde reassures her though no matter what, the cycle will continue to repeat, but if she forms into his body, things can be changed, as he's willing to offer himself to the mother as he can then watch the new future from inside her. But it means everybody important to her will be wiped out. But out of nowhere, Hyde gets shot by someone we know, as Aya has returned. He's confused, however, how Aya's soul has come back, and he tells her that there's no way this is happening since her soul should have been destroyed. But Aya, being the badass she is, shoots him one final time, ending his own plan once and for all. Now, hopefully Eve just watching her sister brutally kill a man won't be too affected by this, but they both can now finally meet and have a moment. Aya lets Eve know from here on out it's her future to form, but to do that, she needs to shoot Aya in the chest. Like, damn bro, she's fucking 12. They hug it out one last time, knowing this really is the end, as she hands her the gun and tells Eve only she can end the time loop. Their souls then switch as Aya is inside Eve's body and Eve is in Aya's. The game then gives us the ability to pull the trigger. This moment is such a sad one. I mean, Eve has to shoot Aya, you know, the person we've been playing as. I just don't think I can. We now cut to the final scene of the game, where we see Aya and Kyle reciting their wedding vows. But in a turn of events, Kyle actually declines the marriage, which is good because that's supposed to be a child inside of Aya's body. This is when he tells her it's time to form her own future as he has to go find eternity, which is a callback to when he told Aya that their love is always for eternity, which is also why he mentioned to Aya that eternity was inside of her. Before Eve leaves, Kyle says one last thing: happy birthday, as technically this is Eve's third attempt at life, a life she can now live with her own free will, and that, my friends, was third birthday. Yeah, this story didn't make any sense to me either. Now, do I hate the game? Yeah, I do. But also, no, I don't really hate it that much. I think it really had a lot going for it, and I don't regret playing it. I do feel if I was an actual Parasite Eve fan who waited 10 years for the new game to release, yeah, I would be pissed. I would hate this so much if that was me. And as a Kingdom Hearts fan, I understand that feeling all too well. Kingdom Hearts 3. But yeah, guys, that's the classic third birthday for the PSP. So hopefully you all enjoyed this episode for 61 Days of Spook. I'll see you all next week for whatever the next game I tackle will be.